The respiratory system. The main function of the respiratory system is to get oxygen into our blood. Remember, we have cellular respiration, which occurs in the mitochondria. The mitochondria is known as the powerhouse because it is the mitochondria that makes energy. The mitochondria needs some things to make energy, and the process by which it makes energy is called cellular respiration. This involves glucose plus oxygen reacting together to make this important energy. At the same time, it also makes carbon dioxide and water, and these are just byproducts of the reaction. What we want from this reaction is energy, and this is in the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse. And to make the energy, the mitochondria needs glucose and oxygen, and this is why we have a respiratory system, so that cellular respiration can occur, because by breathing we get oxygen. And here's just a diagram which shows the mitochondria, and going into the mitochondria we have the glucose and the oxygen, and coming out of the mitochondria we have the all-important energy plus some carbon dioxide and water. So this is all about how we get the oxygen to the mitochondria to make this energy. This happens in the lungs. And here's some lungs here for you. Down the bottom here you can see that I've labelled this piece of muscle which sits under your lungs, which is known as the diaphragm. There's some other major parts of the respiratory system. This is called your trachea, also known as your windpipe. And remember, your windpipe is blocked over when you eat by the epiglottis, and you learned about that last year. So the windpipe, or the trachea, connects into two branches here, and these branches are called bronchi. These bronchi or bronchi break into little bronchioles. I like to think of that they're baby bronchi, so they're bronchioles, and they're just branched again. And at the end of these little bronchioles you'll find little air sacs, and these air sacs are called alveoli. And this is where the all-important air exchange takes place. So as the air comes through when you breathe in, it comes down your trachea, branches into your bronchi, breaks into your bronchioles, into these tiny little branches here, and eventually at the end of these tiny little branches are your air sacs called alveoli. So when you breathe, it goes in this order, from your nose and your mouth. And nasal breathing is preferred because the air is more filtered and it's moistened and warm. It's better for you to breathe through your nose. The air then passes via your pharynx, which is the back of your throat, via your larynx, which is your voice box, down your trachea, also known as your windpipe, into your bronchi. Remember, you've got two bronchi. Then it breaks into little bronchioles, and then it goes to your alveoli, which are the air sacs, and that's where the gas exchange occurs. And here's just another picture. So again, down the trachea, into your bronchi, one bronchus, two bronchi, into your bronchiole, and then your little air sacs at the end, which is your alveoli. And this is what we're talking about down your trachea. There's cartilage around the outside of your trachea, and it's important to protect that trachea. Your alveoli, these tiny little air sacs which are at the end of the bronchioles, this is where gas exchange takes place. So if we have a look and we blow this picture up, right at the end there's tiny, tiny little alveoli. And if you just have a look at one unit here, this is the end of a bronchiole, so I'm just taking one of these little branches here and we're making this into a bigger picture. So the air will come in here and air exchange will occur in this capillary network around the outside of the alveoli. From the heart comes deoxygenated blood without any oxygen in it. That goes around the alveoli and it absorbs oxygen, becomes oxygenated blood and goes back through the capillaries to the heart. This is the function of the lungs, is for gas exchange. So here's a blown up picture. So as blood comes past the alveoli, it's blue because it's deoxygenated. It has no oxygen, it has lots of carbon dioxide. So as it passes the alveoli, it puts the carbon dioxide into the alveoli, so into the lungs, so that you can breathe that out. And it puts the oxygen that you've just breathed in into your blood supply. So all the red blood cells get their supply of oxygen again, and they head back towards the heart. So from the heart, so the pulmonary artery, the blood goes in without oxygen, comes past the lungs, or the alveoli, which is the air sac, it gets the oxygen, and it goes out back to the heart, the pulmonary vein, so that this oxygenated blood can flow around the body. So for the alveoli to work properly, it needs to have a large moist surface area. And if you were to spread out your alveoli to be about the surface area of a tennis court, so there's a really large surface area, it needs to be thin and permeable. And by permeable, I mean that gases can exchange quite easily through there. And it needs to have a network of capillaries around it so that gases can be exchanged from the blood to the alveoli and from the alveoli to the blood. This is what normal lungs should look like. So these are your air sacs with your capillaries around the outside of the air sacs. In early emphysema, you'll see how all of these air sacs are starting to disappear. And in late stage emphysema, you've got no air sacs left. If you haven't got any alveoli or air sacs left, you can't breathe. Here's some more representations. This is a smoker's lungs will look like this, a heavy smoker. This is compared to healthy lungs. And I can show you lots of these different photos. The key point is don't smoke. Smoking will make your lungs look like this and not work, and you'll lead a very, very unhealthy life. Here's another example. The process of breathing involves inhaling and exhaling. So inhalation and exhalation. And it works like this. With inhalation, which is breathing in, the first thing that happens is that the diaphragm moves downwards. As the diaphragm moves down, the second thing that happens is that the rib cage moves up and out. And what that causes is breath to come into the lungs, or air to come into the lungs. And this is caused by what's called negative pressure. The diaphragm pulling down and the ribs moving out creates space to inflate the lungs. Exhalation, or breathing out, the opposite occurs. The diaphragm pushes upwards and moves upwards. The rib cage moves in and downwards, and air moves outside, or is forced out of the lungs. If the diaphragm's moving up and the ribs are moving in, the lungs are going to get smaller and push the air out of the lungs. So it looks like something like this in motion. The diaphragm moves up, the ribs come in and air comes out. The diaphragm moves down, the ribs move out, sucks the lungs open, and the air goes in. And again, the diaphragm moves up, the ribs move down, and it pushes the air out of the mouth. Then the diaphragm moves down, the ribs move out, and the air goes back in. And this is all inhaling and exhaling as well. And you can see the difference here. Inhalation, the diaphragm's moving downwards, and the ribs and the lungs are further out. The air is being sucked in, whereas exhalation, the diaphragm pushes up, the ribs push in, and the air gets pushed out of the mouth.